Welcome to Green and Gold Forever. I'm Eric Drews, broadcasting from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and we'll be joined shortly here by Matt McLean out in La Crosse. He's bearing with us today in light of his internet troubles. He's actually going to be joining us via telephone today, so if the audio sounds a little bit different, that's just for this week only, while some other people that we're not too happy with try to sort out the problem for Matt. And there's definitely some problems to be sorted out in Titletown as well. Another loss, this one probably the worst that I can imagine in quite some time. They seem to be a front-running team. When they get a lead, they keep it. And this time they had a big one and weren't able to keep it. So we're obviously going to have a lot to talk about. Whose fault was it? We're not sure. And we also have some comments of yours that you've all shared on Facebook that we'll read as well. So let's get right into this, Matt. I know you're frustrated already because of what's happened with your internet provider. How frustrating is this game?
Yeah, apparently everybody's dropping the ball here, my internet provider, the Packers, but it's frustrating, but I'll be honest, you said it's one of the more painful ones you can remember. Obviously for me the Seahawks one was a little tougher to swallow, but I don't know, I kind of just felt a little numb. It kind of had that feel all day, like as soon as we heard about the Chuck Pagano thing, I was like, oh, this is bad news. And, obviously on a more personal level, you don't want anybody to be going through something like that. But the motivation it's going to bring to them, we're going into their home, and it's already kind of a trap game. We're playing a team with a rookie quarterback that hasn't been very good. Their secondary's completely banged up. Their offensive line is terrible. And we know that coming in, everybody's expecting us to come in and wipe the floor with them, and it just kind of had that trap game feel. And they decided not to show up for the second half. They looked in the first half how we expected, and I think they knew that, and they thought that they had it in the bag. And although I guess I can't say that I thought they looked completely lackadaisical out there in the second half, obviously something was going on there because that kind of a comeback against a team like ours shouldn't happen.
Well, you say a team like ours, I'm not exactly sure what that means anymore, to be quite honest. I know it's early in the season and everything, and they've started slowly before 2009, 2010, they started slowly there. Some of the pretty good Mike Sherman teams, I remember, granted those aren't really relevant, but, we've seen cases in the past where the team has started very slowly and been okay. 2003 comes to mind. 2004 comes to mind. But to have a team that you should be better than, or you have carried yourself like you're better than, and to be up 21-3 and then to lose that lead, I know you're on the road, I know it's emotional for them. It's a bad sign, I think. And it doesn't mean it's the end of the world, but I don't even know what to say. I felt like the whole complexion of the game changed when Aaron Rodgers threw that interception. And I don't think it was that bad of an interception. It was a back shoulder throw. That happens sometimes. It felt like the offense stopped taking risks after that. That first drive after the Colts took it down, scored a touchdown, closed it within 11, which, is not that close still, but there's a lot of time left. No reason to panic by any means, but also no reason to start going into coast mode. And Rodgers has 3 dropbacks. One is an incompletion, one is a sack, and one he decides to scramble. It just felt like he was really confident, and the offensive play calling was really confident, and I don't know if it's McCarthy, I don't know if it's the execution, but from that point on, the offense looked like it was scared that they were going to lose the game and didn't contribute any effort in actually trying to win it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I like that comment that you made at the end that you felt like the play calling was confident. It's the exact same thing that we talked about last week that McCarthy says, I should have changed this sooner. We're doing the same thing again. It seems like he wants to, I don't know if it's Rodgers, I don't know if it's the play calling, but it seems like if he can't get a 40-yard touchdown pass, he's not going to throw it. You heard the announcers say a couple times, well, great coverage downfield, everybody was covered, and then they pan out and show the receivers on the replay, and they were wide open going across the middle, and you know that Rodgers can see it, he's just not throwing it. So, it was very low risk, but I think a lot of it had to do with they weren't running any routes that were, those easy completions. The Packers are made basically on slants, back shoulder throws, and screen passes, or at least they're supposed to be. But it just seems like there hasn't been hardly any of those in the last couple of weeks. And it seemed like after the game last week, McCarthy regretted not doing more of it, but then we come into this game, and it's the exact same story in the second half. I don't know if they just felt the secondary was bad for Indianapolis, and maybe they thought they could beat them deep all day, but it wasn't working, and they weren't doing the easy completion routes, and the offense sputtered and then died in the second half.
Well, if I remember correctly, the entire game they only had one opportunity to hit a ball deep, and that was in the first half. I think it was the first quarter, but Rodgers overthrew Jordy Nelson by about 10 yards. You don't really, you normally don't see that from Rodgers, but we've seen that a lot from Rodgers since this 2012 campaign has started, even going back to the preseason. I don't want to say, I told you so or anything, but a lot of these things that we've seen so far through 5 weeks of 2012 is the things that I was worried about happening after I saw them be so sluggish in the preseason. Because this isn't a team that's historically been sluggish in the preseason. I thought it was a strong indicator, and so far that they've proven that what they are in the preseason, at least offensively, is pretty indicative of what they're going to be in the regular season. And I don't know if there's a lesson to be learned there, but it just feels like nobody told them that 2012 started. And they've been together as a team for, 2.5 months now, and we're still having the same problems that we saw on family night.
Yeah, completely agree, and I didn't agree with you back then in the preseason when you were talking about it, but, I kind of have to now. It's apparent, and he's, like you said, he's missing these throws that he doesn't miss, and we saw it in the preseason to Jordy a couple times and other receivers, and then we saw it again, obviously, yesterday, and we've seen it throughout the season. You're kind of just thinking, like, how does a player lose their accuracy all of a sudden on deep balls? Is something wrong with him? But it just seems like, how does that happen after, 3 seasons of being the most accurate quarterback in the league? How does that all of a sudden just disappear like that?
Yeah, I don't know, and it's really hard to explain, and just looking at his statistics real quick here, his yards per attempt this year is 6.9.
Wow.
Last year was 9.2. 2010 and 2009 were both 8.3, and then 2008 was the lowest of his starting career at 7.5, and he's a full half yard per attempt below that right now, which his completion percentage is the highest he's ever had, but he's not throwing anything downfield. I just think, I know we've heard a lot about how good the defenses are that they've played, and that's true for Chicago. Chicago's defense looks legit big time this year. San Francisco's obviously got a really good defense, and they showed that again yesterday. Seattle's defense, I think the jury's obviously still a little bit out on them, but they got some athletes. But you can't say that about Indianapolis, I don't think. And is every team you play going to be a good defense? Tom Brenneman said yesterday, and by the way, I think this was one of the only intelligent things that either he or Brian Billick said yesterday, to be honest with you. He said after one of the sputtering drives in the second half when the Colts were starting to come back, he said, "Brian, are all of the receivers really that covered that he can't get rid of the ball?" And I looked at the numbers yesterday. He had 33 attempts. It only netted 243 yards through the air. Net passing yards were 215 when you account for sacks. He dropped back with the intent to pass 43 times and only had 33 pass attempts. He had 5 sacks, 5 runs. Now, at least 2 or 3 of those sacks were not his fault, but all of those 5 runs were designed pass plays, and he had 2 of those sacks, in my opinion only, and I'm not a quarterback, but that looked like could have been prevented, could have at least been an incomplete pass, could have done something with it other than eat the dirt. I don't know what it is with this guy sometimes. He's a phenomenal player, but it seems like sometimes he would rather not be the guy who throws the interception to separate himself from the guy who preceded, who he wants to be, not necessarily wants to be better than, but he's seen what can happen if you're reckless with the ball. But sometimes he's so careful with it that he destroys his chance to actually win the game. He just said, hey, maybe we're in the lead, let's let the defense figure it out. When we don't have the kind of defense that you can rely on to do that week in and week out. Am I off base there?
No, you're not. And, I've always kind of been on the opposite end with you on this, and I was jokingly texted you yesterday that you love interceptions and that you wish that we would throw them all the time. And I've completely been on the other side of that. I love how conservative he generally has been, and I don't like the interceptions. I kind of got frustrated with that with Brett Favre being here for a while, but yesterday I got frustrated watching it, and it was, like I said, you could see some guys open. It's like, why are you not throwing the nice safe route there? Why does he keep looking deep? He's got enough time. I mean, the offensive line wasn't great. There were some plays where they just got absolutely destroyed, and the sacks were on them. But then there are other ones where he had all day to throw it. And like I said, we don't have the game film, so it's hard to tell exactly what the receivers are doing down the field. So it's either he's not hitting guys, the play calling is so bad that he doesn't have any safety routes or anybody, closer to him that he can look for. And I really don't think that the Indianapolis secondary is that good that they were covering everybody. They were down to, I think, their third and fourth corners starting out there. So there's no excuse for our receivers not beating these guys, and I think that they were, honestly. I mean, I'm sure they weren't wide open running down the field, but I'm sure he probably could have hit a couple had he tried to take a chance and get rid of the ball. So, like I said, normally I disagree with you a little bit on how I feel about this, and I like that he's conservative. I like not giving the ball away, but yesterday I was starting to have a hard time watching it, and I was getting very frustrated.
Yeah, I don't know. And before anybody, maybe there's people out there shouting at their screen or their smartphone or however you're listening to our podcast. I know Jermichael Finley was hurt yesterday, as was Cedric Benson, as was Greg Jennings. Those are tough injuries to overcome, but I ran the numbers last night when I was sitting there. Aaron Rodgers in 2010, when everybody could admit he had no running game. Brandon Jackson, who was not any kind of threat at all to run the football for the Packers, and James Starks wasn't a force until the playoffs. When he lost Jermichael Finley, through the end of the 2010 season, when he had no running game, no Jermichael Finley, he had 65% completion percentage, 2,700 yards, 19 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions, 107 quarterback rating, 8.7 yards per attempt, which is almost 2 full yards higher than what he had yesterday. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that Jermichael Finley is not important enough to completely collapse the offense.
And what I'm thinking is, are you telling me then that Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, James Jones, Donald Driver, and whoever, DJ Williams, whoever's in there at tight end, isn't better than what Andrew Luck had? No, we were still more talented than whatever Indianapolis puts out there, even with those guys. So I mean, there's no excuse, and that kind of leads me into one of the things that was the hardest for me to swallow from yesterday was that Aaron Rodgers against a third and fourth corner and a secondary that's already not very good with our talent gets out-dueled by a rookie quarterback, Andrew Luck, with maybe one good receiver over there against our secondary. And that was the most embarrassing part of all of it to me, is how is Charles Woodson and Trevon Williams can't contain Andrew Luck with the talent that he has around him. Reggie Wayne absolutely destroyed them, but Aaron Rodgers can't get anything going against a makeshift young secondary.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, what a contrast between the two sides to have Andrew Luck in his 4th career start, finding gaps in Dom Capers' zone that has made Jay Cutler look like a fool and have made some other guys look pretty bad. Granted, we talked about his problems extensively last week, and I think a lot of those shine this week, but still for the fact that he was able to find open spots, and he got away with a few, and we'll talk about that when we go with the defense. He got away with a few that he shouldn't have got away with, but how do you get outplayed by Andrew Luck with the balance of our defense, as much as it has struggled in recent years, man for man? It's still much better than what Indianapolis has out there, and his receivers aren't even close. I mean, I'm just kind of reiterating your point, but you're spot on with there. I can't agree more. Well, I guess, is there anything else to say about the offense? Is there one spot you'd put the blame on more than any other as far as the collapse yesterday and the overall troubles that they've had in all of 2012?
No, and I think it's pretty much a lot of the same thing. It's a little bit of everybody, but I think a little more emphasized yesterday on the play calling and Aaron Rodgers a little bit here. Like I said, it'd be great to be able to see, the game film, be able to see down the field, see what all the receivers are doing, be able to break it down a little better. But it's like we've talked about to no end here, is he's holding the ball too long, not taking chances, but I think the play calling has a lot to do with that as well.
I would agree with that. I feel that the offensive line has been suspect at times, but quite honestly, the offensive line has been suspect since Aaron Rodgers took over as the starter in 2008.
Yeah.
They never have been all that great. And so that's not some kind of thing that I think you can get away with in their, 5th season together. So they just have to make some kind of adjustment. Maybe they can't play the game they want to play and have 5 wides all the time and run a bunch of deep routes with double moves and trying to split the zone way downfield, and they might just have to take what the defense gives them, but give themselves more opportunities to succeed. I mean, sometimes these other routes that they allow for themselves when they got everybody going deep are just these short, dinky things that aren't going to do anything. I mean, just throwing these dink and dunk passes. So, let's put that to bed for now, and I don't know what's going to happen with that in the future, but the defense is certainly not without blame after a game like yesterday, especially giving up an 18-point halftime lead. I'll start, Matt. I guess the second half looked a lot like what we saw against Drew Brees. It almost looked like once Andrew Luck proved to Dom that he could actually play a little bit, they stopped coming. Or maybe Indianapolis adjusted and figured it out, but they were terrorizing him in the first half. And then in the second half, all of a sudden, it's the same. Nobody's getting home, and when they're getting home, they're not bringing the quarterback down. And just wide open people running. I mean, some of these throws that he was making, 20 yards, 30 yards downfield, guys are wide open. It's just pretty much a clone of what we saw last week against Drew Brees and what we've seen off and on since Dom Capers got here.
Yep, you're right. It's that type of game that we've seen over and over again, where we're running the zone and there's guys wide open all over the field, and it makes it pretty darn easy for a guy like Andrew Luck, who is, like you said, only in his fourth game, but he's talented enough to make those throws.
Mm-hmm. Those were college openings that he had to throw through yesterday in the second half.
Oh, absolutely. There's nobody in the NFL who's not going to make those passes, I don't think. So, I think, like you had touched on earlier, our secondary did get in position a couple times to make some plays and couldn't. But, and he did get away with a few, but he ended up making them look pretty bad in the second half there. And like I mentioned before, with Woodson and Tremont out there and Clay and all this talent we're supposed to have, and we get made foolish by a guy in his fourth start.
How do they not make some kind of adjustment to account for Reggie Wayne? 13 catches for 212 yards. The next closest guy was Kobe Fleener with 41 yards. Mm-hmm. I mean, you win the game if you find a way. And granted, he's a borderline Hall of Famer. I know they were saying yesterday future Hall of Famer, but there's 25 guys with numbers as good as Reggie Wayne's these days.
Yeah.
He's certainly a very good all-pro receiver that they're going to remember in Indianapolis for a long time, but how do you not do something to try to stop him a little more Andrew Luck had 362 yards passing and 212 go to Reggie Wayne. I mean, how does that happen?
Yeah, that's an incredible ratio. I can't remember the last time we've seen something quite like that, but, as a positive for the Colts here, I know this is a Packers podcast, but that was an absolutely incredible performance by Reggie Wayne, too, so I want to at least give him a little bit of credit. Yeah, our secondary could have done a better job, but to see him score that touchdown at the game and make all these catches and then limp off the field, apparently he had severe cramps all through the last drive.
Oh, wow.
And he was carrying the team, putting him on his back, and after the game he had said that...
Did he have a broken leg, dude?
He knew he didn't have a broken leg, dude, but... He did put the team on his back, and he said after the game, I guess, that, he knows how much pain Chuck Pagano's going through, so he couldn't come off the field for that. And I guess, if we weren't Packer fans, I think that would be a pretty special thing to see, but it just hurts even more when you're letting one guy repeatedly kill you. He was the only guy on their offense beating us, and it was just one after another. To have that many yards out of the total yards gained through the air is incredible. And like you said, how do you not adjust for that, or how do you not double this guy? I am perfectly fine letting Donnie Avery catch a couple of passes down the field as opposed to letting, this borderline future Hall of Famer who's still right, probably on the backside of it, but still in his prime, and we just let him throttle us.
Yeah, I'll echo your thoughts about he played a phenomenal game. That touchdown was awesome that he had at the end. Just tremendous effort. Evidently, the orange gloves and orange mouthpiece that's the official color of the fight against leukemia. I thought maybe it was Miami or something.
Yeah.
But so that was kind of, if somebody was wondering about that, that was kind of a cool little silent tribute that he had. I'm certainly happy for Indianapolis, and they got some tough things that they're going through. But from the Packers' standpoint, I just don't know how you let this one get away from you. And it would be one thing if they'd have done this against Houston next week. But to do it against Indianapolis, there's not many more Indianapolis-like teams on the schedule. I mean, look at what you have facing you now. You have two teams within your division that are 4-1. You got to play 3 games against those teams. You still have to play Detroit twice, who's got the kind of offense that if your offense is sputtering, they can beat you. They still have to play Houston next week. They have to play the New York Giants. The Cardinals are 4-1. So to let this one get away, it's not going to get much easier. And I guess we might have to come to grips with the fact that there's a very real possibility. I know it's very early. There's a real possibility this team is not going to go to the playoffs in 2012.
Yeah, and this is a game you have to win just because, like you said, this is one of the very few easy games. Looking at the schedule early in the season, I even mentioned it last week that, we got through the tougher stretch except for the Houston game and, obviously the Giants down the road, but we lose a game like this that we really have to win to make up for that poor start, and then now you have to play Houston next week, and those Minnesota games are looking a lot tougher than they did initially, that's for sure. So, we could easily drop another game this coming weekend to Houston, and all of a sudden you're in a hole, and if you're a team that can't take out these easy teams, you're right, you're definitely in danger of missing the playoffs, and I don't think anybody really thought that we were in trouble of that happening earlier in the season here or before the season started. So, I said earlier in the year I was fine even if we made it through this first stretch 1-3 or 2-2 like we did, but now that's not looking quite as good. It just really seems like we're playing to the level of our competition. If we play a team like the Bears that's a rival, we'll play well and we'll beat them, but if we're playing bad teams, it seems like we play down to them and we don't show up, and it reminds me a lot to the start of the 2010 season, which hopefully that's a good omen, but those games against Miami and Washington that you have to win and that you expect to win, and you just don't, and fluky things happen, and you blow the games at the end down the stretch. You miss some field goals like yesterday, and all of a sudden you find yourself at 2-3.
Yeah, unfortunately, the way they've played so far to me is more reminiscent of the 2008 season, where you kind of struggle.
Yeah.
You let one get away to a young Falcon team who ended up being okay, and you let one get away to the Bucks who ended up being okay, but their team games you could have maybe won, and you're like, well, we'll be okay. We got Seattle, we got some other teams on there. They struggle. They let a couple more get away. They're still 5-5. Everybody's like, well, the schedule's easy the rest of this way. This is a good football team. They're doing everything fine. They got some really bad teams. Well, all of a sudden you let one slip away to a good team in Carolina. Okay, we got time. And then you let one slip away to Houston. And then you let one slip away to Jacksonville. And pretty soon, not only are you questioning who can we actually beat, you're running out of games to get it done. And then the team completely becomes deflated, and you end up with a 6-10 season. And I don't know if maybe this team does go 6-10. I was going to say I don't think that's going to happen. Like we've been saying every time we talk about one of these losses and some of the other failures they had in the preseason, I really don't know what to expect from this team. They could go 6-10. I'm going to say it right now. They could definitely go 6-10. It wouldn't surprise me if they're playing the way they played the first 5 weeks. Because who are you confidently saying they're going to beat right now? I only need 4 to get there. Are they going to get to 10 wins the way they're playing right now? Name 8 teams on their schedule they're going to beat.
Yeah, and you can't do that right now. But, I think at least you hope that this team isn't going to keep playing the way it's played because it's been pretty uninspired and pretty lackluster. It really only feels like they really came to play one game, and that was against New Orleans. That was the only game where you kind of felt that Packers regular season energy. It just seems like the rest has been an extension of the preseason, kind of. So, they're not going to go 6-10. I'll guarantee you that right now. But
well, you still owe me because of Mason's kick yesterday, so you're going to get even more in the hole.
I already owe you 1 beer, so hopefully I don't have to owe you any more. But it's, by the way, that kick was just horrendous. That didn't get blocked or anything, did it?
I don't think so. The way he reacted like it was just a horrible kick, and he
completely missed it.
Both of them were horrible.
Yeah, but watching this team, and I know I'm in the minority here, but I just still have the feeling that this team is good enough to win a championship just by watching them. It just seems like they're doing things here and there which, champions don't do. They don't make these mistakes, and they don't give up second-half leads, but they still have this feel to me of a team that's going to contend, and a team that, although the defense wasn't great in the second half yesterday, is better than it was last year. I can't imagine that Rodgers plays like this all year long and that the offense keeps playing like this. You would hope that the team makes adjustments. So I'm still looking up right now. I'm getting close to the edge of starting to finally say, okay, this team isn't as good as I thought. But I know that Caleb had mentioned it on Facebook here. Is it finally time for us to to think that this is maybe not the team that we thought it was and maybe not a playoff contender. So I'm not quite there yet. I think a win this weekend, which seems nearly impossible at this point, but would go a huge way for the team's confidence and for how we feel. If we get out on the podcast and talk about a big win against Houston, we're all of a sudden going to be thinking that this team is going to the Super Bowl again. So I'm not ready to write them off yet. I know it's been ugly, and I hope everybody sticks in there, though, because I think that this team can still do some special teams. And it's been hard to watch, but I'm not ready to give up yet.
Yeah, and I'm not ready to give up yet. I'm just not ready to say that I have confidence that they are what I thought they were. I'm not letting them off the hook. I think, like you said, the only game that they've played with Packers intensity was the Saints game, and they won by 1 point on a missed field goal. So I don't know what this team is. I feel like, at least in 2010, they had beaten Philadelphia in Philadelphia, a team we thought was going to be pretty good before they started having struggles. They absolutely crushed a bad Buffalo team, and they made it look easy. They beat Detroit pretty much going through the motions, and even though Detroit came back. I mean, you had these glimpses that this was a good team. We haven't really had these glimpses, other than the offense played pretty well against very well against New Orleans. They played pretty well yesterday. The defense played great in Chicago, and they played great against Seattle. But you haven't really had a game where you really felt like, even the Bears game, you felt more that Jay Cutler stinks, or the Bears are having a rough day more so than the Packers are that much better than the Bears. At least I did.
Yeah.
I haven't had any evidence, even in the preseason, in 2009 when they were struggling and they were 4-4, and in 2010 when they were struggling at 3-3, they were killing teams in the preseason. They crushed in 2009 and 2010. They crushed the loser of the Super Bowl in both of those seasons in the preseason when their starters were on the field. So you at least had some evidence that these guys could put it all together. They haven't looked like a team that's capable of winning a championship at any point this year at all, in my opinion. Not once did I think that this team has looked close to what they're capable of. And like I said, we're 2.5 months into 2012 if you're counting training camp and the preseason. You're running out of time if you're going to become that team. And granted, Super Bowl champions stink these days. I mean, you can be the Giants and be terrible and win the Super Bowl, so they're definitely not out of it. But I have no reason to believe that they're going to become that. I'm not giving up hope that they're going to get better, because they're talented enough where they should. They have a track record enough that they're a playoff team every year, and they won a Super Bowl. But as far as the 2012 version, it might be a bump in the road in an otherwise very impressive resume that's going to end up for Mike McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers, but they're going to look at 2012 as a year where it just didn't click for us. So as far as this version of the team, they have the talent to do so, but they haven't had the evidence to show me that they're going to yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have no proof to back up what I said before either, but I think that this team's going to get better. You're right, they haven't shown it, and I guess I'm just going based on pure optimism and what we've seen in the past that I think they can turn it around. But you're right, they've shown no proof that it's going to turn around. They've shown no proof or any glimpses really of being a great team this year. So I can't disagree with you there. I mean, I think that they will get there. I think they'll turn it around. They'll be a playoff team. And, all it takes these days, like you mentioned with the Giants, is all you got to do is get hot at the end of the regular season. But in terms of being a consistently great team in the regular season, you're right, they haven't shown it. And we can only hope that they find it somewhere. I don't know where you just find something like that or just flip a switch, but they've got to do it before, like you said, it ends up like 2008 and you run out of time, and even though you might be playing a little better at the end of the year, you're already out of it. So they've got to find some way to get it going.
I sure hope that they can turn it around here shortly. And gosh, it would be a big win to go down to Houston and beat that team. They look like they're rolling, and obviously we haven't seen them play yet this week, but that's going to be a tough challenge. Any early predictions on what you think might happen down in Houston?
Well, this might be one of the first weeks I predict the Packers to lose just because they haven't shown it yet, and Houston's been incredible. I can't imagine that our defense can stop that run game, which has just been absolutely untouchable so far, and we're coming into playing one of the highest quarterbacks in the league. If you can't stop Andrew Luck, how do you expect to stop Matt Schaub and Andre Johnson and an offense that's just been absolutely rolling? So I think it's going to be pretty high scoring, but if we can't protect Aaron Rodgers from Indianapolis' defense, what do you think we're going to do against Houston? So I think this is a pretty bad matchup here. So I think that we'll put some points up, but I'm going to predict maybe we go down 34-24, something like that. So again, I think I predicted the Packers to lose maybe 2 or 3 times in my entire life here, even when we're bad. So this is kind of rare for me, but I don't see how we can unless we somehow get an incredibly inspired performance. Maybe Houston sleeping a little bit after a big win tonight or something like that. We can only hope, but I just can't see how they can do it.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel too. Especially, I'm just checking online here, and it looks like B.J. Raji's probably going to miss the game, and Cedric Benson might as well. I know both of us think B.J. hasn't really quite played up to his name reputation right now, but he still occupies a lot of space. And I think Cedric Benson obviously is, although Alex Green played pretty well, I wish they would have given him more opportunities to contribute yesterday. But I think that's going to be a loss. I am almost close to a guarantee that this is what's going to happen. They are going to play almost identical to the game they played against New England in 2010. Nobody's going to give them a chance to beat Houston. They're going to have all the injuries. They're going to say this team stinks. They're going to get out in front. They're going to lead most of the game, and then they're going to give it away at the end. It just feels like that kind of game, and it feels like this is the kind of team they are right now.
Yeah, and I'd love to argue with you, but I've got no evidence, so I'm hoping that they can give me a little proof that this team's for real this weekend, but it just has a feel like how do we possibly stop that offense? How do we possibly block that defense and that pass rush with Cushing and J.J. Watt coming at Rodgers the whole game?
Gosh, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, it's a scary thought, and like I said, if we can't block Seattle or we can't block Indianapolis, how do we expect to stop this defense?
Well, those are great defenses. That's what everybody's been saying. That's why we can't get open. I mean, Indianapolis, Indianapolis is so great. Name me 3 defenders on Indianapolis not named Dwight Freeney or Robert Mathis.
Yeah, I can't do it. And yesterday, at the beginning of the game, they were saying that their best defender this year has been a rookie who was in the Canadian Football League last year. They're missing Vontae Davis, their best corner, and another corner as well. And that's probably one of the worst secondaries, one of the worst defenses we're going to see all year. So
you're meaning to tell me they don't have glove-like man-to-man coverage on wide receivers up in the CFL?
No, I don't think so. I think those games are usually in the 60s. So, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe we're going to jinx them backwards here, and maybe they'll come out and just absolutely dominate Houston. But like I said, I just don't see how.
I think they got to stop believing their own hype a little bit. It feels like this team thinks that they're just, and the referees were bad again yesterday, but if you think that the referees played any role in the outcome of that game, you're crazy. I just think they feel like they're a cheated team that shoots themselves in the foot. How many times do you have to shoot yourself in the foot before you realize that you're just, a bad shot?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the refs weren't great, but they're not to blame for the loss yesterday, and it happens time and time again, and I think we kind of had this feeling when they were, predicted to be Super Bowl favorites 2010, everybody was kind of jumping on that bandwagon, and then they started to shoot themselves in the foot then a little bit too against bad teams. And, like I said before, that ended up turning out good, but it just doesn't have quite that same feel. And they're doing it every single game, and even the games that they've won this year, they've made big mistakes like that. And even against Chicago, we're turning the ball over. Against New Orleans, we're letting Drew Brees throw for 450 yards plus on us, and it's every game there's something big that we're doing wrong, and there's really no position that stands out that they're playing really great or anything. It's just I don't even know.
Well, that's how I feel that this is different from 2010 a little bit, is that 2010 you felt they were a good team. You did feel they got hosed a little bit by the referees when they had the 18 penalty game and lost to the Bears by 3. And you felt that the reason they lost to the Redskins and the reason they lost to the Dolphins is because Clay Matthews was hurt and didn't even play in the second game. And Aaron Rodgers was playing with the effects of a concussion. And then that Atlanta, you felt like they had them beat and they gave it away and lost by 3. And then they lost to Detroit and New England almost just because Aaron Rodgers was injured. You felt like if Clay Matthews doesn't get hurt, Rodgers doesn't get hurt, that at best they're 13-3, in 2010. They crushed teams. They killed Dallas. They killed Minnesota. They dominated the Jets, even though they only beat them 9-0. The Jets, that looked like the LSU Alabama game with the Jets playing LSU that year. I mean, they couldn't do anything. I mean, you felt like this was a good team, even though they were 10-6, or even when they were 8-6 and they had to win their last 2 to get to the playoffs. Nobody doubted that they were going to win their last 2 at home because you could tell, your eyes told you that this was a great football team that just had some bad luck and some bad bounces go against them. This time it feels like a team that thinks they're a great football team, thinks that they've had a couple of bad breaks, when in actuality they've just gone out there and they've gotten beaten 3 times. And granted the Seahawks one was close. At the very worst, if I'm going to be completely honest, that should be a half a win for the Packers. They should be 2.5 and 2.5. I mean, because you would have won the game 12-7. It's not like you got, royally you got screwed on that last call, but a 12-7 win over a team like Seattle is not exactly something to puff your chest about.
Right.
I guess we're looking towards next week, the Houston Texans. The Packers heading down to Houston for only the second time in franchise history. Do you remember that first game, Matt?
I do. That is, I specifically remember a Brett Favre lob touchdown to Donald Driver in the end zone, and that we did come out on top. That's about all that I remember, but I remember it was a win.
I remember that play, and I remember the game-winning field goal. I believe they either won 17-14 or 16-13 or 16-14, something like that. And Longwell kicked a game winner that barely got over the crossbar and it grazed the upright as it went through. Do you remember that?
I guess I don't remember that part of it. No, you would think I would, but I don't.
That was in that 04 season when, what did Longwell have, like 3, 4, or 5 last-second field goal wins for them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was one of the more dramatic of those. So I would love to see that happen. Obviously, this year, I bet you Mason Crosby would kick it out of bounds in a coffin corner punt manner if he got that opportunity the way he's had. He kicked that game winner in his first game-winning attempt in the first game of his career, and then since then has had quite a bit of trouble in that situation, it seems like.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully he'll get a chance to redeem that this week. If the Packers are that close to where they can kick a game-winning field goal at the end, I'll be very happy. Before we go, let's share some of our social media comments that we had. We put a question up on Facebook this afternoon that asked, what were your impressions of yesterday's games? Who's most to blame? Is it time to panic? And is it just a slow start? Or is this an indication of more struggles to come? And we had 2 responses from 2 of our biggest fans. Caleb Pike said, Matt alluded to this a little bit earlier, I think I've now decided that there is a good chance that this simply isn't a playoff team. The only thing I can think of is that Mike has too much faith in Rodgers and company. It seems like the lead starts to slip away, and instead of changing his game plan, he simply holds on hope that they'll pull through. We then get shut down on offense and lose. On a side note, our DBs need some ball catching drills. It feels like we have 4 times as many dropped interceptions as anybody else. That certainly came across to me yesterday. I feel like they dropped at least 3. Tremont had 1 drop. Woodson had, I think, 2, and then there was one that Walden had a shot at. It was rocketed at him about 150 miles an hour, Joey Harrington style, but he at least got his hands on it.
Yeah, I think everything he said there was spot on. Obviously, we need to learn to catch the ball back there, and I like the way he put it with the play calling, too, that it just seems like he expects them to kind of pull through eventually and doesn't change the game plan at all because he's confident with what he came into the game with, and it's come back to bite him a couple times now. So I completely agree with everything that Caleb said there. It's
almost like a baseball manager mentality. Just let them figure it out. Mm-hmm. And in football, when you're on a short sprint as opposed to a marathon, maybe that's not the best strategy. And right. Brian Dinsey also commented, the defense and the kicker were to blame. I know this goes against what we talked about last night, but Rodgers brought them back to score when the defense gave up the lead. Then Rodgers set them up for a field goal, and they missed. So, yeah, hard to disagree with that. The defense and the kicker certainly had had quite a bit of the blame to shoulder in that second half collapse.
Yep, can't disagree with that much either. I mean, that's one way to look at it with Rodgers putting him in position to win the game. I guess we didn't really talk about that, but he did come down and score and then put him in field goal position. So I guess we need to give him a little bit of credit for that. But, I mean, throughout the whole game we saw some things we didn't like. But, yeah, Crosby's got to be better. You know, he's even since the preseason, he's looked a little bit off. Something's not going right there. It just seems like he gets on these long streaks where he's just kind of off his game a little bit, and then he'll eventually swing it around and be one of the best kickers in the league. And also, like we mentioned before, our defense against a rookie quarterback has got to play better. There's no disagreeing with that at all either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. You're spot on there with your assessment that Brian was spot on. All right, so if you want to make any comments on future podcasts, you can go to Green and Gold Forever Podcast at Facebook and type a message. We've had some people commenting on that in the past few weeks, and we certainly appreciate their input. You can also hit us up on Twitter. That's at Green Gold Forever. That's the number 4, the word ever, at Twitter. And you can also go to our main source to get the new show and to get the podcast archives, and that's at our Podbean site, which is greengoldforever.podbean.com. And you can hear all of our past shows, and one of these days we'll probably have something up there to complement the podcast. But for now, it's the best place to go to hear our archives. And I hope you'll join us next week. tough game ahead for the Packers. Who knows what's going to happen? Hopefully they surprise Matt and I, and they pull out a win in a very hostile environment against maybe the best team in the NFL. So for Matt out in La Crosse, we appreciate him hanging on his telephone, gosh, what am I, 95 years old, on his cell phone. And thanks for pulling through, Matt. And we'll talk to you next week. I'm sure your internet will be fixed, and hopefully we can talk about
sure.
hopefully we can talk about a Packers win. Take care, everyone.